and welcome to our webinar on academic faculty job search in science and engineering, specifically focused on R1 universities. Kate will talk a little bit more about what topics we'll be focusing on in this webinar and some of the topics that we will not be focusing on. We only have an hour, so we're going to try to get as much of the critical important information to you as soon as possible so that you can go on and have a successful application cycle. So we call this Beating the Odds, how to be number one in a pool of 600 overqualified applicants. That sounds like a lot of applicants, but these days that's what a lot of these competitive schools are drawing in. One thing that we're going to focus on really is getting to the pre-screen interview. This is the most important step at this stage, is getting to that stage along the interview process. And then ultimately to, your actual pre-screen and on-site. But we wanted to really section this off because we believe that they sort of require different strategies for each. So a little bit of focus on what the webinar will be covering. So let's see if I can skip to the next slide here. There we go. Okay. So we're going to give a 30-minute presentation. First, just on some slides that we've prepared and how to be strategic about getting to a pre-screen interview. Any questions that you posted online, we'll try to answer through the webinar and through the slides. I just want to say that we got a lot of questions, almost 100 questions, and there should be a few hundred people also joining today. So we're going to do our best to go through all those, but in practicality, we can't actually go through every single one. So we'll do our best. As we go along, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. If you don't see this in the bottom of the Zoom, you should be able to click on more and there should be a Q&A here. This is the host view, but you should see a Q&A, so you won't see some of these other parts. You can always drag and drop this into your toolbar if you want to have quick access to that. So we'll try to answer some of the questions that are straightforward in real time, and then others we'll answer at the end. And that will be in the last 30 minutes, will be about 15 minutes of answering questions from the chat that were maybe not as straightforward, and then also 15 minutes of live questions. So we'll have people raise their hands, we'll unmute them, and then we'll talk with them. And then also we'll share slides with everyone that's registered because we have your emails at the end of the presentation. Hopefully that'll be helpful. And also this talk will be recorded. So I just wanted to first introduce all of us. So my name is Dane deQuilettes. I'm a new assistant professor at Princeton University in the Electrical Computer Engineering Department. I just started in January. We're very lucky to have Dr. Kate Reidy, who is incoming assistant professor at Stanford University starting this fall. And then also Dr. Grace Pan, who is at University of Michigan starting January 2027 in the Material Science Engineering Department. So let's see if, here we go. So first of all, just a lot of you had questions a little bit about our specific trajectories, to get to the places where we are today. So I just wanted to give a little bit of my background, and then Kate and Grace will give their backgrounds. So first, I just want to say I'm a first-generation college student. The reason I mention that is because a lot of this effort in towards getting a faculty job is a lot of networking. And so if you don't initially have a network as an underrepresented student, we'll talk a little bit about some of the strategies in order to try to build a network and also start talking with other faculty that have gone through this process before, which is very helpful. I studied chemistry during my bachelor's and also in my PhD. And then I sort of started moving more into the, I would say, material science, applied physics space during my postdoc, which was at MIT in the electrical engineering computer science department. And then ultimately I moved actually to MIT Lincoln Lab to start doing work on quantum. Between those first two things, I actually applied, was my first cycle, and that was right when COVID hit. And so it was interesting because there was a lot of hiring freezes. I essentially used that experience at MIT Lincoln Lab as my second postdoc. And so I kind of viewed it as a pivot in some of my research and what I wanted to pitch eventually as my faculty research program. I then also went to a startup that I co-founded for a few years before eventually moving into my position at Princeton. And I'll just say I was not really entirely sure a lot of this time exactly what I wanted to do with my career. I was industry, working at FFRDC, and then ultimately into academia. But I did find that academia was the best fit for me after going through these different experiences. So definitely recommend people if through internships and things like that to experience things so that you can find out what you do and don't like. This is just a overview of my application cycles. I actually went through three of them. And the major thing I want to highlight was there's a key difference between my second cycle and third cycle. And I went from, I would saying have a few pre-screen interviews, which was four pre-screen interviews, up to nine pre-screen interviews, from two on-sites to seven on-sites. And so there was a lot of things that I would say I learned in this process, and we're going to be sharing some of those learnings today that, I'd say was kind of a major step edge change in my application package and a lot of our application packages. Um, and then also I'll just say this is a really hard process. And right now we're sort of getting into the thick of things, so be kind to yourself. This can be really challenging from a mental health perspective. And so I'd say, just take it easy, lighthearted. You also want to be focused and put a lot of effort on this if you're going to take it very seriously, which you should. But really, perseverance is a key part of this. And I would say after a few cycles, I got a little discouraged, but eventually things, turned out. So definitely just encourage, not being too let down if people say no, because we're going to get a lot of that, many of us. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kate Reidy. I'm an incoming assistant professor at Stanford in the Materials Science and Engineering department. And yeah, I have a very different story and trajectory to Dane. So I started off my undergraduate in Ireland. So I did it in nanoscience, physics, and chemistry of advanced materials, which is a very long name, but it basically means like material science in Trinity College Dublin. So that means that I experienced the whole US application process as an international student on an F1 visa at the time that I was applying. So I know we got a few questions about that in the pre-questions, so I'm happy to talk to my experience there. But to answer very briefly, um, I have not experienced any determination based on your visa status on like getting to the pre-screen interview. And in fact, I found all of the universities very happy to help me apply for visas, etc. Once I actually got the job offer. So I wouldn't consider that aspect in your application if you're thinking of applying to the US, as universities are very happy to sponsor visa for people who win searches or are, the top candidate in the search. Um, I then did my PhD in material science and engineering at MIT. I actually ended up applying for a faculty position in the final year of my PhD. So I know we got a lot of questions about that too, on how many postdocs are quote unquote required before you apply. And for me, the answer was none. But the reason behind that was that there were two applications that year which were a particularly good fit for my research. So finding like fit with the department that you're going to apply to is something that I found very important. And if you do find something that's a good fit, I would say don't let the timing hold you back. Again, kind of like Dane said, it is a daunting process. And I think we tend to feel that we never feel quite ready. But my advice would be if you see something that's a particularly good fit and you're in the final year of your PhD, feel free to put something in. And the worst that could happen is that it's a no and it's good practice for postdoctoral applications or different aspects like that. So that would be my personal take on the job search that I went through. I deferred my faculty position and I did a Miller postdoctoral fellowship at University of California, Berkeley, and joint between the Molecular Foundry at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So I'm also happy to talk a little bit about finding a postdoctoral fellowship to set you up for success in the faculty job market. So I found that applying for different fellowships and like during grad school and during postdoc time is actually quite good practice for the type of writing that's going to occur in these faculty applications. And there I'd say like reach out to potential hosts, etc. early, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that's my overarching story and the things that you can chat to me about, and I'll hand it on to Grace.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Pan, and I'll be starting in the Material Science Department at the University of Michigan in the next calendar year. So I'm by training and by background a physicist. I did my bachelor's and my PhD both in physics, but my research program sits at the intersection of material science, physics, chemistry, and even engineering departments. So when I was on the job market, I was actually applying to a variety of searches in a department agnostic way. I was looking for programs and calls that fit my profile that was in experimental condensed matter physics and materials for quantum information sciences. So I applied to a lot of quantum information science searches despite not being a traditional quantum person, but I was willing to be intellectually agile in proposing projects that I was interested in that could help quantum information sciences. Um, so in terms of my application journey, I sit somewhere in between sort of Dane and case experiences. So I did also apply during my final year of my PhD program. Again, like Kate said, I applied to a department and a school with a very well-suited sort of call and fit. In part, also, it was in a geographical location that I liked with a good friend who would have become my research scientist if I got the job. So in the end, that application cycle turned out null, but the chair of the department at the time told me, look, I really want you. You're still a little bit young, so we're going to make an offer to somebody else first, and we'll try to make you a position, but if you get a job before then, that's okay too. So with that sort of encouraging advice, I applied again as a first-year postdoc. I did not have any results from my postdoc time, but did do enough of a pivot experimentally to feel like I was really learning and contributing in new ways. So I made 6 applications in my first year as a postdoc. I was invited to 3 pre-screen interviews, had 3 on-site interview experiences, and got 3 faculty offers. And this is also a time in which there were many hiring freezes. And in fact, one of the searches got fully canceled, but the 3 offers I got were pushed through in the middle of these hiring freezes. So I sort of eked in there at the last minute. I'm currently actually a visiting scientist on a pre-batical at Periodic Labs, which is a startup doing AI for science. And before then, I was an intelligence community postdoctoral fellow at UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is where Kate and I became friends. And I'm also happy to talk about the postdoc experience, applying to fellowships there, and this transition toward a faculty role.
Okay, so I'm going to kick things off with a little bit of reasoning behind why we decided to host this webinar, and a big thank you to Dane for getting us all together and thinking through this. But we were reflecting on our experiences and we noticed that kind of information about how to approach this process that we got was often limited to certain networks. So we all asked advisors and mentors that we had at MIT or other places for advice. And this webinar should not be an alternative to asking those people. So you should definitely still go ask those advisors and mentors that you have for advice because that's the most valuable route. And we benefited from that a lot. But we wanted to share some of our key learnings to have them more openly accessible. And Dane will share a little bit of a very interesting academic work that's been done on this, highlighting inequities in this process of applying for faculty applications in the information that you have access to. So we're hoping to shift that scale a little bit by making this information more broadly accessible. Another reason is that we all just went through this process and have our own experiences fresh in mind. So when you are asking those mentors for advice, or even when you're asking us, I found sometimes talking to people who had just gone through the process, they have it more fresh in their mind and they have all the things that they went through and advice to share. Because when you're a little bit further on, sometimes you kind of forget how the process actually went for you, or the process can change. And we do want to be a space for open questions, and hopefully we'll answer a bunch of them throughout the time. And the last reason, and Dane will share a little bit more of timeline, but that application cycle is upon us. So even though it's the summertime and they're not due until November, December in some cases, it's good to start thinking early about reference letter writers and different aspects of tips and tricks for the application. And what we are not trying to do, because we also got a lot of questions on this aspect, or some things that might be slightly out of scope for the webinar, but we will send these slides to everyone afterwards, so you'll have these clickable links. So we really don't want to try and recapitulate anything that's been conveyed in all of these other great resources. So we've laid out a variety of them here, but there's really excellent resources from MRS, who's the Material Research Society, even on YouTube or higher education. Chronicle, you can read a lot online and watch some videos about the application process. So we'd really love to direct you to those wonderful resources too. We won't focus too much on the pre-screen interview or the on-site interview, but rather how to get to a pre-screen interview. So preparing your application process, everything you think before, because statistically, this is the largest filter in people's applications. So there'll be, as Dane said, 600 applications that will be filtered down to just a few that will get a pre-screen interview. We may have follow-ups for this pre-screen and on-site interview depending on interest. But in the interest of time and scope today, we're going to focus on this pre-screen interview. And then just a kind of disclaimer that we can mainly speak to our own experiences. So we gave you some background, and I think we cover a broad range of types of application that happened, but we all are, junior faculty starting at R1 institutions. So it's very difficult for us to speak accurately on application to primarily undergraduate institutions or primarily teaching roles. So I know people had a few questions on those, and we're happy to do our best, but I don't think we're the best avenue for answering those questions. And similarly with differences between academia and industry, I think we have a very academic heavy panel. We do have Dane and Grace who have spent a little bit of time in industry, so they can talk a little bit if you have big questions. But I think for that, which job do I choose? That might be better suited for another panel. So we're really focusing on preparing your application and what to do when you're preparing that application package aspect of it.
Okay, thanks, Kate. So before we get into some of the strategic advice, just want to give a zoom out and give a little bit perspective of what this faculty market actually looks like. And we've mentioned this number a few times, and it's true. So in a lot of highly competitive R1 universities these days, especially with COVID, a lot of hiring freezes and budget cuts, a lot of universities are drawing in about 600 applicants for about 1 to 2 openings. And so just thinking about this funnel, we're starting off with 600. Usually there'll be a pre-screen. Some universities don't do pre-screens. You'll go straight to an on-site, but the majority do these pre-screens, and that will be usually around 15 to 20. So that's about 3% of the applicants. And then after that, a small handful of those will be selected and invited for an on-site interview, which is about 1%. And then at the end, depending on how many openings they have, they'll select, one of these candidates, maybe 2. And so in the end, it's about 0.2%, let's say, acceptance rate. And so just to put this in perspective, it's really one of the key parts of this is going from the 600 to the 15 or 20 pre-screen interviews. This is the largest filtering step. And so what we really wanted to focus on was making a webinar where we're very in detail describing some of the strategy in order to get your application seen by the search committee, reviewed favorably, and then ultimately to that pre-screen. Some other things that I wanted to highlight, is really how important placing faculty at different institutions is. So really, it shapes every aspect of academic life, including scholarly productivity, research priorities, resource allocation, educational outcomes, and also career trajectories of all individual scholars. So this process is extremely important for the enterprise of academia within the United States. And there's a lot of research that's actually shown on how a lot of faculty hiring and retention is actually done. So this is a really, this paper came out a few years ago, and really, I just want to focus on some of the numbers because this also helps us to sort of think of how this process historically happens. So in this study, they looked over 300,000 faculty members across 10,000 departments over 368 institutions from 2011 to 2020. This paper has about 230,000 accesses. So really, a lot of people have looked at it. Maybe some of you have seen this. And some of the key things you'll see are really shown here on the right. I know it's sort of hard to see, but what you'll see is sort of a ranking of different universities depending on what sort of field. So this is just the applied sciences field. And what you can see is that a lot of universities will send faculty from where they were trained to become faculty in different areas. So these are sort of the blue lines. Depending on what size each of these are next to the university, this is the volume of faculty that go to those institutions. The red is viewed as a upward move in what they would call the hierarchy. But what is useful about this is it starts giving us the idea of actually how hires are made from different PhD granting institutions ultimately to where faculty end up. And so this is a useful tool because you can sort of go on here and say you have a goal, to go to X university. You can actually use this as a resource to see what faculty, how many people have already gone from your university to the university you want to go to, and gives you a little bit more intuition of potentially if you have a connection, if you could reach out to them, start establishing this network. How did you do it? This is really useful. Some things that I wanted to highlight is they emphasize a lot of this systematic inequality and hierarchy in the faculty hiring process. And so this was really, a study showing that a lot of this institutional prestige really impacts how faculties are placed. So what is your PhD granting institution? And so a lot of our hypothesis here is that a lot of this can be attributed to somewhat of the hiring networks or what information you have access to. And so as we described, one of our goals is really to share a lot of this information, how to build these networks, and then ultimately how to hopefully overcome some of this inequality that's been shown in the literature. This is just sort of fun, zooming in on one of these. University of Michigan is well known for producing a lot of faculty hires. And so you can see in this example, if you look at Michigan to UT Austin, about 11 faculty have gone through there in the applied sciences field. So then you can, look department to department and see, really where these movements are happening and everything. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Grace, and we'll talk about once a search committee gets your application, what are they actually focused on?
Yeah, so Dane did a really excellent job laying out some of the broad general statistics and trends and dynamics within this entire process. So as an individual, you can then ask yourself, well, what should I be doing and what should I be prioritizing to get to that initial pre-screen interview and get to the process? So again, a data-driven analysis was done of the faculty hiring process in R1 schools spanning material science, chemistry, physics, and engineering. And a survey of about 50 or so respondents of faculty who had served on search committees suggested that search committees focused mostly and most importantly in terms of getting to that pre-screen or initial interview on your cover letter and on your CV. The research statement was the next most important as per the survey, and the teaching and diversity statements are the least important. So this is really conveyed in this sort of right-hand plot here, where search committees, by and large, rank that cover letter and CV as the most important part of the application. Now, this is not to say that the research and other statements are not as important. And in fact, the research statement becomes an important differentiator at later interview stages and at the final application, at the final evaluation processes, but that the cover letter and CV really serve as what might be referred to as gatekeepers toward additional review of your application. And what's interesting is that if you then survey applicants what they think is most important, there are discrepancies in what applicants and search committees, what applicants think that search committees spend their time reviewing and what search committees actually do review. And the greatest difference and discrepancy in this perception is in the review of the CV. So the CV is, it seems like a pretty cut and dry document that's easy to shape, but the CV really represents everything that you've done up until that point. So the search committee will take as long as it takes to review your CV, to citation chase through it, to call up people on it, etc. The cover letter is the gateway to maybe even the CV being read, but really the cover letter and the CV together represent the most important and the most reviewed documents at that very initial stage. At the initial stage, the search committees seem to, at least within this poll, take about a couple minutes for the other statements at this initial stage. So given that search committees have to review hundreds of applications and spend just a couple minutes each on every document in your application, how do we begin to craft an application that really hits hard? And that's what we'll be going over in the next few slides.
Perfect. Thanks, Grace. So yes, we're going to focus on setting up your strategy. We've all been through this process, some of us many times, and I would say have learned along the way. And so we're hoping to share a little bit of these strategies to sort of even the playing field as we've been talking about. Okay, so first I want to talk about the timeline and how to be strategic. So this is sort of a calendar view of right where we are ultimately through the whole process. Right now, really should be finalizing, preparing a lot of your job application materials, finding your recommendation letter writers, talking with them early, and starting to prepare your job talk and abstract. It can be, I would say, pretty stressful if you push this off, especially as you start getting invited for pre-screens and on-sites. And oftentimes, I remember spending pretty late nights the night before, not getting great sleep. So this is an ideal timeline. Of course, some of us are procrastinators, not me, of course, but yeah, I would definitely recommend following a similar timeline to this. So the jobs posted depends on what department. Chemistry, physics are typically earlier. Chemistry, I already started to see some of the postings here, and you can look on different websites such as ChemJobber to find these. And then the application, is usually September to November. You'll get the pre-screens around November, December. For engineering, usually, these are around the same windows, maybe a little more offset by a month or two. And then usually in the beginning of the new year is when you'd have campus invitations, on-site interviews. And then ultimately the whole negotiation and offers and second visit, will kind of be in the springtime. So really this is a whole year process. We're starting in June, July. This is going to go all the way to April or May. And so as I was saying, it's a challenging process. It's extremely rewarding, but also should just be ready for it being, a marathon process. Some other things I just want to say is really, submit early. Sometimes a lot of these applicants are reviewed, and they'll start looking at what seem like promising candidates before the deadline. So of course, all of them are going to be reviewed and by the deadline, but there is sometimes it's helpful to get earlier vision into your research package earlier on, and that's when some of the committee members can start advocating for you, maybe even earlier on. And then timing is really important for hiring. So Grace and Kate both talked about this and having, a kind of perfect fits for these departments. And so we're able to just apply to a few departments and have really high conversion efficiencies. I would say mine was more a broad search. And so, but the ones I would say I ended up getting were also good fits. So we're going to break this down thematically into some of the themes we're focusing on. So one of them is building a profile visibility. This is a really important part of building sort of your network. And of course, I feel like this is talked about all the time and everything, but this does matter in academia, of course. So in my process, I ended up going to about 6 to 8 conferences and really, I would say, networking over the application cycle year. And at those moments where a lot of times I was connecting with faculty in departments I was interested in, also ones that I eventually found out were on the search committee. And so each of these conversations were essentially small interviews before, getting to the actual interview. Um, if you're a grad student, you can also apply to some of these higher visibility awards that grad students receive. So, for example, Materials Research Society Graduate Student Gold Award. This is often indicative of grad students that will become faculty, and you can sort of track and trace a lot of students that get this. Also, of course, applications to postdoctoral fellowships are going to benefit from going to some of these conference discussions and talking with faculty and understanding maybe how to position yourself into this next stage. Um, and then I would say, it's not critical, but I did find that this was important for me. I ended up becoming just pretty active on LinkedIn. And I would say a lot of my network and connections were made through here. And oftentimes I do talk with other faculty, through this platform that I've talked with at conferences, and that's been very helpful in sort of just being aware of people being aware of what work's coming out and what I'm focused on, and even that I'm on the market, things like that. And then this is another important thing I would say do. If you know someone well in a department and then you're applying to that department, I would make a whole PDF of your whole application, send it to the person that you personally know in the department, and just let them know that you've applied. Oftentimes, if they're on the search committee, then this is something that they'll look at, and oftentimes since it's 600 applicants, it's a little bit harder for them to look at each one. But if you know them personally, that's gonna be helpful. And then also, if if you do know them personally and they're not on the search committee, it's very possible to forward it to people on the search committee if they are an advocate of your work. So definitely recommend doing that for personal connections you have. Another theme is communicate research productivity. And so this is not entirely obvious, but the first thing that I'll say in this survey that Grace also went through, people are going to look on Google and try to look at your Google Scholar. So I would recommend having your Google Scholar up to date. Oftentimes, some things don't even get populated because the crawlers won't find some of the information. So this is just a screenshot of what my Google Scholar looked at the time when I was applying and interviewing. But you'll see a few different things on here. So one is some patents that maybe wouldn't normally be on there. I actually manually added some of these so that people are aware of what I'm doing, what work I'm putting out, because sometimes patents aren't published for a year or two after you actually file the patent. And then other things, conferences, and if it's a conference paper, sometimes this will get posted, Google Scholar find it. Other times you should manually add it. And then archive preprints are also really important. I would suggest trying to wrap up any papers or projects before you submit your applications. Again, people are going to try to understand what work you're doing currently and is it at the frontier of your field. So this is a good way to communicate that, is having these archive and other posts early on. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Grace to talk about this theme.
I think I'm going to chat about this. So the getting exposure early before the actual interviews. So I think Dane mentioned some of these aspects of the grad student gold awards at MRS, but something that I found pretty useful for me is that in the year before my final year of my PhD, I applied to a bunch of these kind of future leader workshops. So they're these workshops that are held, like Northwestern has one, I know Caltech has one, MIT, Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon share one. And the links are also going to be here, but you can Google yourself. And they were very helpful in giving advice for preparing for the faculty applications. And they also meant that oftentimes you came to the school beforehand and you gave a talk and you could meet the faculty and have them get to know you. So this does require some advanced planning because you're thinking before you're actually applying to apply to these future leader workshops, but it does make you, make a talk and get some exposure to the current faculty. Um, Going to talks of people in the department that you're targeting at conferences, so you know what the overarching departmental research is about. I found that actually quite useful when I got to the writing stage of what faculty I would collaborate with. And having a trusted friend that has gotten offered recently or faculty that have served on search committees to go through your materials. So this can make, small but significant changes in how your application appears and how quickly the search committee can find information you want. So we're going to give you specific examples of our stuff later on, but having anyone basically go through your materials and check to see if in a few seconds they can kind of get, or a minute or two, they can get the gist of what you're saying. I would say it's never too early to start jotting down ideas and also never too late. So I personally didn't think I was going to apply for a long time. And then I kind of saw that the fit was so good with the institution that I was just like, okay, I need to apply. And I would recommend taking some small time away or as much time as you can from the small details of the lab to focus on your higher level vision. Because I feel like sometimes as a PhD student or postdoc, we can get so caught up in our day-to-day lab work that we're thinking about what our next experiment is going to be and not what our kind of 5-year plan for our research vision is going to be. So that was something that I did. I think I wrote a bunch of it over the winter holidays, or even it doesn't need to be a long time, but even like a few days off work or a long weekend or something to kind of get yourself into that headspace of the writing. Okay, and now we're going to go into some tips and tricks for key parts of your application. And I know we had some questions on this in the chat, so hopefully these will be answered as we go along. So we'll start with cover letter, CV, research statement, teaching, diversity, and letters of rec. So here are tips for the cover letter. And I included an example of mine here. This is not to say that this is the perfect example of a cover letter, but it's just so you guys can get an overarching view of one that's been successful, because I often find that very useful to have an example of something that was successful before. My main key takeaways would be stick to one page and use your departmental header if you can. So it kind of looks like an official letter, like lay it out nicely so that the department can see it quickly. In paragraph 1 to 2, I'd kind of make it specific to each department and call and highlight your specific fit and introduce key aspects about yourself and qualifications for the job. So this is where, you see what they're advertising and you see how you fit it. Paragraph 2 to 3, I would discuss specifically what your research would be at that institution. If you have the time and the interest, you can include centers you would want to join and specific contributions. This takes some time, but it is well worth it because it shows them that you are a targeted candidate for their particular university, which is very valuable. And as Grace said, the cover letter they actually will read and go through in depth. I would give a brief timeline at each stage of your background and contributions, often in reverse chronological order. So, you're a postdoc and you're a PhD and you did X, X, Y, Y, and then this was the impact or the recognition. So highlighting, any awards you got for particular work. And then some aspect of your ability to fundraise already, if you've gotten any of those graduate fellowships or postdoctoral fellowships, that's good evidence that or if you've been involved with your advisor in grant applications, it's good evidence that you can go forward to be successful faculty, and also some goals in teaching you can put in there. I would say stick to one page. This is my main key takeaway. I think the people who are reading this, there's not much that you can't get in one page that, is striking. So that would be my main advice here. Tips for the CV. I know somebody asked, can we share an example of a CV? So Grace and Dane have very kindly showed examples of some of the pages of their CVs and how it was laid out at the time they were applying. There's also a link here to similar structures that are on MIT's careers website, but you can find example CVs on a bunch of career websites. I would highlight your funding and fellowships early on. So these funding awards and academic honors that you can see that Grace has here, again, it kind of brings that up to the fore if someone's going to only spend a few minutes looking at your CV. List your publications, and I think we have varying ways that people can do this. Some people, I know Dane put his first author publications all together, and it looks like Grace put hers in reverse chronological order, but bolded her name. So make sure that it's very easy for people to see when they're glancing at your CV, what's your first author work, and what is your collaborative work. They may also look at your higher cited papers online. So as Dane spoke to, importance of having your Google Scholar up to date. And then I'd say this is kind of a personal thing, but I really like CVs that are nicely laid out and easy to read. There's a few really good templates that I've found on Overleaf for CVs, but you can also use Microsoft Word or a variety of things to make sure there's enough white space. I think in contrast to the cover letter, I don't think people care how long this is, as long as it's laid out well so they can skim through and see the important information.
Great, thank you, Kate. So now we'll move on to the statements. So with the research statement, one piece of advice that I was given at the time, and I think maybe Kate and Dane were as well, was to both get in and out quickly to provide that broad interview, and of course to justify it substantially with technical detail when it is reviewed at later stages for feasibility and for fit. So the first page of that research statement should primarily be a summary of your research program. It should be easy for a reader to scan, and if the application reviewer is only going to read your statement for 2 minutes, they're going to focus on that first page to get a holistic view of your research program. All three of us used simple figures in our statements to help tell most of that story if the text was too impenetrable for an impatient reader. So these are examples of the overarching figures that Dane, Kate, and I all made. And while there are, of course, many ways to do figures, one thing that we were all sort of prioritizing was to use a lot of bold print when needed to really summarize things at a high level and to lay out our thrusts within an overarching theme. And this can do a lot more to anchor the reader in addition to the 3 to 5 pages of text. Additionally, for the research statement, you do want to think about a 5-year plan and not just propose incremental continuations of past projects. If you can synthesize particularly your postdoc, your PhD, your industry experiences toward a greater vision that's more than the sum of its parts, then that's an additional bonus as well. In writing that research statement, it's usually advantageous to list not specialized titles, but to really propose proposals or bigger scientific questions beyond individual projects. And this again highlights your ability to lead a research program beyond just being a graduate student seeing a single project to completion. And one piece of advice that I got at the time was to make the research statement broader than you already think it is. So all of us get stuck in our own heads and in our own fields, trying to think through every single experimental or computational detail of what it is we're going to do. But really, a lot of the readers will not be in your field. So you'll have hopefully a couple expert readers in the department who can really ask you deep scientific questions. But for most of the rest of the readers, they're going to want to anchor you and your research program in the greater context of how it fits into the department. So you want to really feed them the cognitive ease of reading your statement. In terms of the technical aspects, different departments will ask for different lengths. Some departments might ask for 3 pages, others might ask for 5. Other departments might ask you to write 3 separate research proposals, each 3 to 5 pages long. This can especially be common in chemistry, but please do, of course, follow the precise guidelines of that call, and don't push it, I would say. And like Kate said, regarding the cover letter and the CV, definitely format the statement in a very readable way, because that cognitive ease will do a lot more for the reader than cramming those additional few lines of technical detail. So we'll discuss the teaching statement briefly. We've decided not to cover the diversity statement since most of those have been phased out at this point. So the teaching statement, while it is sort of, statistically on that study ranked a little bit lower, still conveys your commitment to education, and as well as your engagement with how much research you did in looking up that school, the department, and the resources. So for the teaching statement, Dane and I both provided a couple snippets of our individual statements. And one way to structure the teaching statement is to start by just listing out your previous experience, listing out awards if you've gotten them, and just to be specific, just to show that you know how to teach, and then to propose future teaching that you could do in that department, in that school. It's important to be department specific, right? You're applying to a department. So if you're applying to a material science department, don't list courses you would teach in physics. Maybe that's obvious advice. But do list courses with their titles and with their course numbers to indicate that you have seriously gone through the department catalog and the resources and opportunities there. One thing when you do that is that you do want to be mindful of the language you use, because if you're too persistent in saying you want to teach only one course, well, you don't know the context behind who's already teaching that course and what they did to develop it. So, many faculty have been teaching courses for many decades and don't really want to give up particular courses. So ideally, there are multiple courses that you'd be open to teaching or qualified to teach, and not that you must teach. You can also propose loose ideas for potential seminars or courses you could bring to the department, which is what Dane did here. And I also proposed a course on superconductivity and its multiple applications. And finally, it can be a bonus if you indicate university-specific resources that you would use in your teaching. For example, this might involve mentioning university teaching centers, or the use of shared facilities to do lab demonstrations, etc. And all of this goes to show engagement with that particular department and university. And finally, we just want to end on a couple thoughts about letters of recommendation. So none of us have seen our letters of recommendation as it typically is. But in the process of thinking about your letter writers and asking for them, you want to think a little bit early about who your letter writers could be. So obvious choices are, of course, your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor, and if your PhD or postdoc advisor are not writing letters, you may want to be prepared to explain why. Collaborators are also a great source of letters of recommendation, particularly if they're at other institutions that show that you can manage or connect across other institutions. Um, and, uh, as Dane has talked about in the networking parts, it's nice to build relationships with professors that are well regarded in their fields well before the process of applying to jobs. A good letter from a professor that the search committee knows well and trusts carries a lot of weight and can go a long way. Of course, there's a balance between sort of a well-regarded professor that you might not know very well, and a more junior professor that you might know very, very well. So that is really on you to evaluate the most strategic way to curate your letters of recommendation. Something about timing logistics is that you should have up to 5 references ready at the time you're applying. Some searches ask for up to 5 letters of recommendation. Most will ask for 3. Sometimes these letters are asked for upfront when you submit your application. They want the letters uploaded, but other times they only want the names, and the letters of recommendation are requested for later directly by the search committee to the people you've listed. And this is important because you might have very strong letters of recommendation, but if your initial application package, that CV, that cover letter, that research statement, don't get you past that initial pre-screen, those strong letters of recommendation might never be seen by the search committee. And finally, one thing I do want to mention that might be obvious advice is that you should clearly communicate to the people writing your letters that you want to apply and that you're requesting a letter. I have heard stories of people listing their letter writers and their contact information without actually squaring that with their letter writer first, and that can cause, avoid that situation and really be upfront with your letter writers. And I think with that, we're moving on to the Q&A.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone. So we did run a little bit over our planned time. So we'll have 10 minutes for questions. Potentially, maybe some of us will be able to stay on a little longer if there are additional questions. But we'll get that started. And so initially the plan was to review some that are in the chat. So I don't know if Grace or Kate found any ones in particular that seems good, but we can start with those and then we'll open it up to raised hands.
Yeah, I've been monitoring the chat as we go along. I think, Dane, maybe you can speak to this for someone said that they heard in a similar panel that many places will only consider your application once, and you should only apply once you have a coherent story to tell. How does that compare with kind of my advice of not letting timing dissuade you from applying? Did you find that was true in your application cycles that they would only consider you once?
I I actually applied to a lot of the same. So when I said I applied to like 20 schools each cycle, actually a lot of them were the exact same departments. And I actually think that a lot of search committees didn't even see my application just because there are hundreds of them and it just there was not a way to sort of get it in the eyes of the search committee. So I don't think that's true. I know it's not true because yeah, I have lots of examples of probably 5 to 10 universities I applied to multiple times and actually then had in my third try a pre-screen and then ultimately to an on-site interview and an offer. So yeah, it's really dependent on what the search is. You want to make it specific. So I think maybe before wasn't as good as a fit, so they just threw me aside. But then there was a call, that's very specific to optoelectronic materials, and I applied, and then I sent my PDF to some faculty that I knew, and then got to the next stages.
Great. And I was mainly material science, but two questions maybe that Dane and Grace you can both speak to. If you have interdisciplinary interests and expertise and you're applying to different departments at different schools, e.g. chemistry and physics, or Dane in your case, ECS and material science, should you have two different research statements and proposals? Does that present a conflict if universities talk to each other? And, are there aspects there that you should think about tailoring to different departments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So conflict-wise, I'm going to address that easy part first. I think no. I think every university who reads your application also knows you're applying to many other universities, and that's a good thing. If you get many offers from many other universities, that ultimately makes you more attractive in the eyes of universities, right? So that's a good thing to apply to many schools. Um, as insofar as tailoring your application, that is really up to the individual. And that depends on the flexibility of your own research program and your willingness to be adaptable to different calls. Um, so there's no like one holy piece of advice here other than I did try to be intellectually flexible, but I still didn't want to compromise my own interests when tailoring that statement to chemistry versus materials versus physics. Sometimes it's less an exercise in changing your ideas and more an exercise in just how you frame your ideas in that initial first page of your research statement. So that can be one thing to play around with. Um, Certainly for if the department calls and the program calls are highly specific and really not what you're doing, um, you don't want to twist your own research program to fit it. But I have heard of many situations in which a call will be for one kind of scientist or one kind of profile, but that they'll ultimately hire the best person for the job, no matter what their program is. But that's anecdotal. I don't know if Dane or Kate, you have more to add.
Yeah, I'll just add something quickly to that. So my background's in chemistry, and I was applying to chemistry, material science, electrical engineering departments, as well as physics. And I would say I had a chemistry specific proposal, and then I had more of a material science, electrical engineering proposal. I did interview at a few different chemistry departments on site, but I think once we started talking, they were like, "You're probably more of a materials chemist, like engineer than maybe we thought." So I think you can do that, and you might get to the onsite, but oftentimes when you are on the onsite, they'll start filtering so what fits you best, and then maybe it works well, and they're like, okay, well, you should apply to, or did you apply to this department? Maybe we can transfer your sort of FTE to there. So I would recommend doing it if you have proposals or writing them, but it can be kind of clear once you actually interview like where you fit in best and everything.
We got two questions, and the three of us actually discussed this about resources for keeping track of open faculty positions every year. I think we discussed there's some online, like the rumor mill for condensed matter physics, and sometimes material stuff is posted there. Dane, you had one for chemistry,
Yeah, ChemJobber,
ChemJobber.
yeah, is the
LinkedIn, the department websites. We'll send, when we send out the slides, maybe we'll include some links to those two things we mentioned. Okay. Um, a lot of questions on postdoc versus PhD work and how much that should weigh in on the applications. I only had PhD work in my applications, and that was fine for me. I think speaking to what most excites you and what leads into your future research vision is the most important. But maybe Dana, so I'd like to, anyone who does not have postdoc work, um, totally fine. If you see a really good fit of an application, I would recommend you to go for it. If you can think of a longer term plan. But yeah, Dana and Grace, I don't know if you have discussions on extent that your postdoc versus PhD work mattered more in your research applications.
Yeah, for me, I mean, this was funny because I said I did my second postdoc, which I would kind of switch fields from just pure semiconductor optoelectronics and then to quantum. I was keeping track a lot of where hiring was happening across different departments, and of course, quantum is a hot topic. So in my second postdoc at Lincoln Lab is when I actually changed some of my research proposals in my second and third cycle to be more quantum oriented. And I would say all my offers mostly came from that focus on specific like this niche part of quantum that I was working on, which was growing quantum diamond. So yeah, I think it can be really helpful to, especially if it's a more niche topic and there's less competition and there's a targeted hire, then that can help if you've done it, let's say a postdoc in that specific area.
And as a follow-up, Dane, how did you feel that your industry experience kind of tied in?
Yeah, mostly for that, actually, I think I was principal investigator on most of the grants that the company got. And so I think the way that people viewed that was just my ability to fundraise. And so I think that was something that I sort of sold when I was in my application interviewing is, hey, I've already demonstrated this ability to fundraise. Um, I always have these connections with program managers within Department of Energy and Solar Energy Technology Office and Department of Defense. So I think that I definitely leveraged a lot, but it was, I had a bit more experience going from postdoc into research scientist so I'm a little bit later, I would say, than a lot of traditional applicants.
Great.
Yeah,
I don't know.
similarly, I like Kate, I didn't do much of a postdoc before applying, but I had no results from my postdoc. But I think if you can really show that what you're doing in your postdoc can lead to new ideas and really propose research directions or synergies, even without having results from that postdoc, that can be a definite plus. I saw that there was more questions about industry. And, I did not have my industry job at the time that I applied and got my faculty job. So I can't personally comment on that. But any experience you do have in a scientific space, you can think about leveraging toward your faculty role in the future, which is what I will be planning to do with my current industry job, even if it wasn't relevant to my applications at the time.
Okay. Getting answers from faculty on LinkedIn, I think maybe Dane, you can speak to this, but maybe we don't need to. I think like I would say personally, like approaching people at conferences is always the most valuable option. Like sending a cold connection to someone on LinkedIn usually is not going to work. But approaching people as conferences, we also had a question about like if you're feeling imposter syndrome at conferences or you don't feel so comfortable going up to people to talk. I have always found it very valuable to go to people's talks. And for every talk I attend, I try and think of a question that I could ask. And sometimes I ask it in the actual session, and sometimes I go up to the person afterwards and ask about it. And I feel like that's, jumping off scientific interest as a trigger point to lead to further discussion is always very valuable. Um,
One thing I'm just noticed, I know we hit the time. I was curious if Zoom was gonna cut us off, but maybe we're still okay. Do y'all have some time to keep answering a few questions, maybe a few more minutes, or I know you may have to run to other things too.
um, I have a few minutes.
Okay.
Um, we had a question about will the search committee review applicants after the deadline? I would say no, do not aim for that. The letters of recommendation, you might be quite stressed about gathering them. I would say go in advance and talk to your letters of recommendation and make it easy for them to know when the deadlines are. Um, I've heard very small cases where letters of rec can go in after the deadline, but I would not count on that. If you can't access your letters of rec, I would say go with a different letter of rec.
I would strongly recommend, as Kate is saying, with the timeliness, to for every letter writer that you're asking, CC their administrative assistant on all of these emails. Their administrative assistant will probably help them upload dozens of letters of recommendation, not just for you, but for undergraduate students, for graduate students, etc. So please contact their administrative assistants. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I guess yeah, I did apply late on one, but I had this was very like strategic because I had seen that you can look at rumor mills and who got interviews and then like whether they're still in the process, and I saw that they hadn't filled it. So I actually submitted one late knowing that they hadn't made a
Uh,
decision. And then I actually got invited very fast in a short timeline on like an interview. But that was, I would say, like a one-off. And you kind of have to be paying attention or know what search committees, if they're like worried about a failed hire or things like that. But yeah, I would not recommend that, but it is possible to do that if you're particularly really good fit and you just missed the deadline or something.
I will second Dane there. My current job, I did apply to after the deadline because it had such an early deadline that I just didn't see it in time. And in cases like that, when you really think you're a good fit, and you just, you don't want to miss your shot because you just didn't refresh the rumor mill for a week or something like that. And I think admissions committees, if they see that you're a good fit, they are open to that. But I again would not recommend doing that.
yeah. In
But don't
fact,
let that stop you.
as Dane said earlier, sometimes applying early can be beneficial because they'll already be doing a few little screens. Um, a lot of questions on recommended number of first author papers. I would say so dependent, so variable. Maybe as a guideline, at least one. I don't know. I wouldn't let it hold you back from applying. I personally didn't have any like really huge papers come out during my application cycle. I had a few ones that I was very proud of and I was able to speak to, but none of them were like nature science or that type of big paper come out when I was applying. And I didn't feel that that was a huge factor. I think it was more about the research vision and how I could speak to the work at hand because it's so field dependent where people publish their papers. I don't know, Grace and Dane, if you guys felt the same.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that search committees are typically trying to identify gaps in what they have in the department and where they think the future of science or engineering is going. So if you've made major steps in a new direction that they want to go, then that's the most important thing. And sometimes, you might just be in a really hot field and you get a Nature paper and there's a lot of other people that maybe have Nature papers in there. So it's harder to differentiate yourself. But if you're carving your own path and, maybe it's more obscure journal and less citations, a lot of committee members will identify that if they've established what future hiring is going to look like for their department.
Yeah, and something we talked about among the three of us is that um, the person who's really going to be advocating for you is going to be the person who's adjacent or in your field, who's in the department, because they're going to be the person who can speak to the impact of your work. So in that sense, I would say making sure you go to conferences and present your work and like the impact of your work, and your own vision for your work and what you did, might be even more important than getting a super big paper in a journal. Okay, I don't know if we want to switch to like people raising their hands. Dane, did you want to do
We could try that, yeah. Let's see. So okay, I see a hand raised. Oh, I'm hoping that, okay. I see a question from Akash, so I'm gonna allow Akash to talk. Go ahead, Akash.
Hi, Dane. Thank you. Um, I had a previous question about the industrial R&D versus postdoctoral research and how they are traditionally being weighted and compared during the screening process when they look at your cover letter and CV.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know exactly how they were weighted and compared just because I haven't talked with the search committee or how they evaluated me, but I would say from my intuition that my research, sort of during my postdoc, was weighted very heavily. And then my fundraising for my industry experience was weighted heavily. Oftentimes in industry, unless you're really on a academic team, you're not publishing. And I still tried to publish as much as possible. That was some guidance that an MIT professor gave me in any of my positions. He said, continue being a leader in your field, continue publishing, showing that you're a thought leader. And so I just mostly pursued that and, tried to be someone that was still present and trying to push forward the field. So I think wherever you're at, that's the most important. And the best way to capture thought leadership or ideas is through publications and disseminating those, or also at conferences. So that's my main advice is, wherever you're at, even if you're not able to publish or it's not as much focus on that, still displaying thought leadership in certain areas.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Aladdin. I'm gonna unmute you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I just have a question that I posted in the chat. Is having a long duration postdoc, like 9 years experience, considered as a weakness for job application? Maybe Dane, you could speak about this. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I don't know. Again, I think it's actually similar to what I was saying last time is as long as you're continuing to produce good results that are driving the field, there shouldn't be any impact. I think there's lots of different, reasons why someone stays in a postdoc for a long time, and you just want to describe that in your cover letter. But if you have results that are showing that that hasn't inhibited your ability to still do science and research and get grants and awards and have publications that are impacting the field, then it's not too bad. If it's, I think that's going to raise some eyebrows if it's 9, 10 years or so. But I would in your cover letter describe potentially if there's any reasons for that, and then just make sure you're demonstrating your research productivity through other means.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Amaranth. Yeah, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you for arranging this webinar. This has been really helpful. Uh, Regarding these faculty applications, I see that some schools ask for a personal statement, which includes your research statement, your teaching statement, and the community service all in one. In such cases, is there an advised amount of, say, 3:2:1, like, three for research, teaching, and community service, or things like that? Or yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the same.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So for the personal statement, I think I highlighted a lot of like leadership roles that I had had and service to the community. So those are kind of also the three tenets of what it means to be an academic, right? You have research, you have teaching, and you have service to the broader community. So in that kind of personal statement, I highlighted anything that I felt that I had done that had serviced the broader material science community, whether that was like leadership roles in grad committees or outreach to high schools or the public or anything that kind of broadened material science and was part of my like service to, enhancing material science joy in the world. So that's how I approach that statement. I don't know if
Uh,
Grace and Dane had different.
Just to add the follow-up, I mean, so I did see a couple of postings where they didn't ask any research statement or teaching statement. Their only ask was cover letter, CV, personal statement, and list of references.
Oh, but then I think that's maybe a research statement. They're just saying it as a different name.
Okay,
That's
thank
what
you.
I would read that as. I don't know if you guys have.
Yeah, I would second that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
maybe we have time for two more questions. So we have Jay. So I'm gonna unmute you, and then one more after that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so just maybe this answer depends on like the person, but how did you all manage your time between work and your main responsibility and applying for these jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, you will not be applying to a job unless your current advisor, if you're in a postdoc or a PhD position, is not already supportive of you applying that job. So to that job. So ideally, you will have that built-in time, discussing with your PhD or postdoc advisor. They have the knowledge that you're applying for a job, and if you're successful, they're successful too. Maybe Dane can speak more from his experience navigating applying to these jobs in industry and more technical postdoc roles. But this is up to you. I mean, I think Kate made a really good point earlier where sometimes all it takes is a long weekend to get the gears spinning and get some momentum in writing your research proposal and getting your statements put together. And really the idea that writing is not just the um, act of opening Microsoft Word and typing things in, but also writing something you do, like when you're walking to work or thinking about your ideas. And if you can just like balance, I found it nice to like balance the passive writing and the generation of ideas with actively just like blocking out long weekends, getting some momentum, like Kate said. But it's really up to you. But please do get the support of your current employer in this process. I think it's very hard without that.
Yeah, I would say this is really hard. And my second cycle, I ended up restructuring my proposals entirely. And at that time, I was working at MIT Lincoln Lab, and so I had a full-time job. And I would not say I had to execute on a lot of things. So I was, leading programs and couldn't spend my time writing things. So I ended up being able to take vacation days, usually most Fridays, and I take the vacation day, and then I just write a lot of the work proposals then on the weekend. But I really dedicated time to focus on that, just to sort of have blocks of time where I could really be focused, make a lot of progress on it. But it is hard if you have a job, and if there's not the expectation, like in postdoc, usually they're like, okay, we know that if you're doing a postdoc, most likely you're going to apply for faculty. And so that's kind of built into their expectations. But yeah, it is a hard thing to do, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah. On that topic, I'm seeing some questions in the chat from earlier that I just wanted to speak to a little bit of like how to define your vision and like should it be this something that your lab hasn't worked on before or your PhD and postdoc advisors have not worked on, and how much to integrate different things. I think I think your past research always informs your future research that you're going to propose. I think when you think of this research statement, try think about like if in 5 years with, you know, five people working for you, what you could accomplish and not what you working in 5 years could accomplish. So I think a big mistake that people will make will be like proposing follow-on experiments from their postdoc or PhD work. And it's fine to have, like, I think my statement was heavily weighted in, like, I can do this work because of work I've done before. You don't need to do 100% pivot and make sure that there's nothing that your postdoc or PhD advisor has ever worked on in your statement. But taking that time to think through at like a higher level what would be what you could accomplish with other people working with you too. And in terms of someone asked me specifically, how has my experience been in writing and procuring federal grants as an international student? I think that's totally fine in the application process. I don't really think it matters at all that I was an international student. I think when you get to the actual grant stage, there's a few that you need to have a green card for to be eligible to apply, but the university has been very good in dealing with that aspect so that I get a green card and I can apply to those.
Great. So maybe we'll end the seminar now. So thanks everyone for joining. As we mentioned, will share the slides if you registered and you have your emails. We also record this, and with some admin approval, we'll most likely share that with everyone. And we also may have potentially future opportunities for after you get to the pre-screen, hopefully. And then you do the pre-screen interview, or you get invited to an on-site. We'll cover some of the strategy for that. So thanks again, and hopefully see you all soon.
Good luck, everybody.